afternoon, everybody. My name's Amy Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. Thanks for joining us for our annual information session in partnership with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, our colleagues at DEEP, to provide you with some information and insights into the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program, or OSWA, and the Urban Green and Community Garden Program, or UGCG. I think I easily just call it the Urban Green Program. Just a few introductory remarks before we dive into the presentation. Please stay muted throughout this presentation. We do have a pretty good amount of people that have at least registered. So far, we're at about 25 and over 40 registered. So just out of courtesy to everyone, just please keep yourself on mute. You're welcome to keep your video on, although if we start to lose some reception and we feel like we need some bandwidth, we might ask everybody to turn their videos off, but you're welcome to keep it on. I should say before I dive in, I did want to introduce the fact that CLCC is also joined today by Yao Owusu-Darko, who is our project specialist, and he is administering our grant programs for the benefit of the land trusts. And also today with us from DEEP are Allison Clark and Jamie Sidoriak from the Land and Acquisition Management Office. And I saw that Andrew Hoskins, DEEP's Chief of Staff, is also with us, at least partly for part of the time today, which we appreciate very much. So as I said, please stay muted. You can keep your videos on unless we need that bandwidth. And throughout the session today, please post your questions in the chat, as we will be pausing after Allison and then Jamie go through the applications to take those questions and read those. If you can mute yourself, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. So please stay muted, as I said. And also, just to kick things off, if you would just put in the chat the organization and or town that you're representing here today, number one. Number two, whether or not this is your first time with the OSWA or the Urban Green programs, if whether or not you've ever submitted before, if not, that this is your first time, and also what you hope to gain from this program today. Allison and Jamie are not going to go line by line through the application or the other documents, but we'll kind of skim through and then really, more importantly, take your questions with respect to the programs to help you move forward with your applications, which, as you know, are due September 30th. So I think I've hit everything here. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Allison and Jamie to introduce themselves on behalf of Land and Acquisition Management at DEEP, and then we will start with the OSWA grant program. So Allison and Jamie, take it away.
Okay. Hey, I'm Allison Clark. Welcome and thank y'all for coming. Great to see so many people here today. Wow. I know some of you just by looking at your names. Pleasure to see you all come back, and a lot of new names, but hopefully we'll get to know each other better with your application, and I'll get to know you much better once we award the grant, and then we go through the process of acquiring property, or in which case, if it's Urban Green, you'll be working with Jamie and get to know her a little better. That being said, I'll pass it to Jamie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Sidoriak. Some folks might remember me from being in this office in a prior role some years ago, and I've returned to assist the Land Acquisition and Management Unit again, and this time taking a role in the Urban Garden grants, as Allison and Amy mentioned. So glad to see you all here, and looking forward to this discussion and helping everyone out afterwards.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. And it looks like we might even have a question right off the bat. But I think, Allison, what we should do is start with the, let's open up the application. Yao, if you would be so kind as to share it. And we'll start to run through. And then, Allison, why don't you prompt us to pause, and we'll grab some of the questions out of the chat as we move along.
All righty. Well, as you can be seen here, this is our 25th grant round. Over the years, we've protected millions and millions of, I've done 47 million in grants, leveraging, 3 times as much in purchase price. This is a great program so that, we can do more with open space, purchase more, a little from us and a little from you. It is a competitive program. We do score the applications. Each of the departments within DEEP reviews it and gives us a score. And the awards are based on available funding. If there's, 40 applicants and 5 million, we may not always be able to, fund it fully. The max funding is about 65% or 75% if you're in a targeted or distressed municipality. However, sometimes we can only do 50% or so. I usually tell people that's about the average over the years that we fund is about 50% of the price, but more if you're lucky. Be as thorough as you can in your application. We want you to basically highlight your property's pertinent features, what's unique about it, what makes it special. Every property is different. So applications are due September 30th. In the meantime, first thing first, get your appraisals in order, but that's usually what I tell people right off the bat, get going with that. That's the thing that takes the most time. But applications due to me by email, application and appraisals under separate cover. And we get back to you hopefully with an announcement. But everybody's favorite question is, when are you going to announce? I'm already getting that question. So it usually takes us about 4 to 5 months internally to review everything, hopefully an announcement shortly thereafter. So, first page of the application, your basic information, who's preparing it, if you're from a municipality, who the CEO is, what the purchase price is it an application and fee or easement? The easement values have to be valued differently a little bit in the appraisals. So if you're hiring an appraiser, make sure you make that known that you want to value an easement as opposed to a fee purchase. There's some caveats in that first block. Somewhat new, this came about in recent years where there's a push to get projects closed quickly. We introduced some task completion timelines. So if you have any existing projects that are older than 2019, we ask that you not apply or, turn back those funds. So if for some reason you find that you can't close the project, you could get in touch with us and say, hey, this project stalled and we're going to turn that money back. You can put it back in the till for the future people. So that's a little bit new. There's, again, a renewed focus on, past grant compliance, proving that the property will be accessible to the public. We'll get into that a little bit more further on. Eligibility, I think we all know it's for land trust, municipality, or water company. If you're purchasing in a target or investment community, you must obtain approval from that community. That's important to know at the get-go. Of course, we are going to want a conservation easement on the property. That's where it comes into predominantly preserved in perpetuity. You must show applicants must show past grant compliance. There's a whole section of the application for that. We want pictures, we want, trail maps and all that. You'll see that coming up. Some things that we can't do on grants for land that, is to be used for intensive recreational purposes. There's more information on that later in the application. Anything that's been previously committed to public use. If, for instance, conservation easement has already been recorded on the property, please let us know immediately. You even contact me now if you think that that is an issue that could be problematic going forward. And land to be acquired for eminent domain, we won't do grants for that. This program does not fund administrative costs, appraisals, surveys, and whatnot. I want to say Amy might be able to help you in that regard if you wanted to get in touch with CLCC.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Allison, I'm going to interrupt right there. Can you hear me? I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I meant to announce at the very beginning of the session, or as by way of reminder, that CLCC's Transaction Assistance Grant Program, which is open only to land trusts, is now accepting proposals for that program. And the information is on our website, which I'll post in a minute in the chat. But we are, the program or the proposal deadline is tomorrow. And so we're going to be hanging around after this session today to take any questions that you might have about our Transaction Assistance Grant Program. And we highly recommend that you submit a proposal if you think you might be incurring transaction-related expenses within the next year, because if you don't put a proposal in, we can't invite you for a formal application for that program later in the year. So more on that later, but thank you, Allison, because I had meant to mention that at the very beginning, but I'll put a link in there right now. And Allison, please unmute yourself. Allison, please unmute yourself.
There we go. Thank you.
There we go.
Somebody gave me the unmute. I couldn't find it with the application on the screen. All right, so at the next, these are the climate change conservation. Pay attention to this. This is a section that, you know, was modified in response to the GC3 Governor's Council on Climate Change recommendations. We added a lot of climate mitigation and adaptation language, resource values here having to do with those features. So a lot of this is pretty common sense, but you know, there is more of it. This section has been increased and changed in recent years. As far as the NDD database goes, there's just an alert in this regard. I know I was contacted by Wildlife. They asked me if for OSWA grant purposes, because they're getting slammed with requests, if they could just put together maybe a consolidated, you know, form, because, you know, this being open space, they don't have to recommend, you know, construction and guidelines or any of that. So just as a heads up, if you're asking for NDD information, I think they may just focus on a short form this go round, so that they don't have to do the full-blown letter. So they're just basically going to identify, you know, species of special concern, you know, important habitats and all that stuff. But it may look a little different to you coming back this time around. Let's see. All right, so for supporting material, topo maps, let me see. You can get, just to give you some information here, topo maps are available. You should, just a resource you could use is the nationalmap.gov. That they can also help you with topo maps. They also do orthophoto maps. So the road maps, I recommend you go to your town hall, your town GIS sites. They might be able to help you. We do want you to, whenever possible, on the application, outline the site. I know in some grant applications, I'll get an aerial map, but it's like really far away and I can't identify where the property is. So it's a great help if you can use a site outline to identify where your property is in that photo. Same thing with aerial. The boundary map, you could get from an assessor's office. Your assessor's map would be fine for the application. You don't need an A2 survey, but as a heads up, after the award is granted, we will require the A2 survey. We love photographs, so I love photographs anyway. So 2 or more photos, we like to see pictures of the property. Ultimately, after we close, I always go back to the application and pull photos from it for use in our open space reports. So the more the better, but we do want at least a couple of them in there. Does anybody want to stop there? Or?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat if you want me to read them. In particular, when you were overviewing the section about natural resource or environmental assessment, let me read. So Adam Goodman from Aspetuck Land Trust questions, if there are environmental concerns on the property, how does DEEP's commissioner decide if remediation may have been done satisfactorily, and if contamination is or not a concern? If there are EPA and I think it's like CERCLA or CERCLAS numbers pertaining to the property or the site, but there's been no current monitoring. Is this case by case? And they need to know before beginning the grant process. Does anybody have experience with having a contaminated property, and how did we handle that?
We have had applications with contamination. We do, and I typically am not well versed on that subject, so I always go to my colleagues. I would go to my remediation division, and sometimes I'll even ask them to go walk the property with me so that we can actually see it. Sometimes things come up even when I'm just reviewing appraisals. Appraisers are very helpful. Sometimes they take pictures and put them in there of, you know, auto parts or tires, and while it may not have ever been disclosed, I'll say, hey, and I have put that in an award letter in the past, before we can award this grant, these grant funds, this has to be cleaned up. So whether it's disclosed or not, sometimes we find out about it. But if it is a known contamination, I will go to my remediation folks and ask them to weigh in on it if it's going to be problematic. Hopefully I'll catch it right in the application process before the grant's awarded. If it's minor, you know, and we feel that, you know, just a site cleanup is necessary, we'll give you some guidance and tell you what we need you to do before the grant can be awarded.
And by we, you mean that would be responsible by the sponsor or the applicant prior to or after being awarded?
It depends on the extent. If it's just minor, I'll usually call up the applicant and say, hey, you know, thank you for disclosing that. I'm going to talk to my folks. We'll determine, you know, the severity of it and hopefully work through it. If it's something that we can't work through, we just may not award the grant. If it's something we can work through, obviously it would be a condition in the award letter stating that the grant funds for the new application can't be funded until this is resolved.
Amy, did you have your hand up on this topic?
I did, but Allison really addressed it. And in the one
Great.
project that I had handled, that was exactly what happened. It did wind up having to have a phase 3 remediation done. The grant was awarded conditioned upon the cleanup of the property to the satisfaction of the agency, which occurred, and that property closed.
Good. And then another question, and I don't know if we grazed on this topic just yet, and it's a good one, Allison. The question by Karen is land required to allow public access? Could that be clarified? Can it be limited to town residents or limited access due to land that may have escarpment slopes along a designated greenway?
Okay. All grants have to provide public access. That's a requirement of the program. It's, you know, clearly stated throughout. If the property has frontage on a public street, we always want you to have a sign out front. That's been sort of stressed, and more in recent years, people have asked me a lot, can we just put the sign on a trail? And I say, no, we want the public just driving down the street to go, oh, hey, wow, that's open space. I can go there. We want new people to find the property, maybe not just people who check out Land Trust website. So we like the sign to be visible. We want a little parking area for a couple cars. We want to introduce it to people that may or may not know that it's open space.
Right. And I think it's a reminder that these monies that fund these grant programs are, taxpayer dollars. So they are public funds for public purposes. But I guess, are there any discretionary circumstances? Like, for example, if there were an endangered plant or something to that effect? I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
We will make accommodations for endangered species. We just did that in a grant this year that was awarded. In that case, with the commissioner's approval,
Right.
We will say in the letter, in this instance, you're not encouraged to have a public trail. In this case, it was a turtle, protected endangered turtle. So we wanted them to restrict public access where the turtles were. And
Right.
that
So
was,
just reroute.
again, it was put in the award letter. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we told them they could have guided tours, at times of the year when it would not be, endangering the species. And we modified the public access if that's the case. I did see in that question though, however, if you could limit it to town residents, no, it has to be open to the general public. You cannot limit public access to just town residents.
A follow-up question, are trails required? Must you have trails?
We like to have trails, but it's not a requirement unless you're purchasing the property. If it's being purchased for agricultural uses, that's the one time when I will insist upon a public access trail, typically because the property is being farmed. There's areas that are not safe for the public to be. So we encourage perhaps like a perimeter trail, maybe that just goes around the property, and we'll have a public access trail map attached to the grant agreement as an addenda. And that gets recorded on the land records to ensure that, this property always has a public access trail, even though it's a farm and even though it's, actively in use.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that because that's exactly where I was going to go, also with discretionary items for the commissioner, and knowing that farmland is also, when it comes to public access, there are certain areas of property. If you are applying for land that has an active farmland component, and that is another area where I encourage you to talk to Allison as you are preparing your application, and to make sure that you are indicating the areas of the property that should not be publicly accessible due to the farmland activities.
So with that, do we want to keep going?
Okay. All right. The property cost. This is also new in recent years. We used to ask for 2 yellow book appraisals. Now, because of staffing and whatnot, we used to have to review these appraisals sometimes ourselves. And then because we just didn't have enough staff, we started contracting it out. Now, the applicant is responsible for providing 1 yellow book appraisal and 1 yellow book appraisal review. If you're hiring your appraisers right now, just a couple, suggestions. When you hire your first appraiser, you might want to mention to them who you're considering as a review appraiser. Sometimes appraisers don't like to work with others. They, maybe they haven't, jived well in the past. So talk to both appraisers, both your review appraiser and your appraiser, to make sure that they're both willing to work with each other. Let's face it, the first original appraiser is going to then be reviewed by the reviewer, and the reviewer is going to have to come back and say, you need to change this and to make it Yellow Book compliant. You need to do that. So the appraiser and the reviewer should hopefully get along and work well together.
Ellison, if I can ask you,
Just another note.
there's a question in
Go
the
ahead.
chat as to whether, well, stating that the grants will pay 65% of fair market value. Is the fair market value the Yellow Book appraisal value? Can the selling price be more than fair market value?
I always say, why would you pay more than fair market value? But that being said, I see people do it. Again, just as a caveat, we can pay up to 65%. This recent grant round, we were fortunate enough to fully fund all the projects. But last year, for instance, there was like 34, 33 applications. I always say to people, ballpark 50%. That way, you may be pleasantly surprised instead of disappointed. So yes, but it is based upon the approved fair market value, which is the appraised value, and that which was approved by the reviewer. And if you want to pay more than fair market value, go ahead.
Kim, I just want to jump in on that point, though.
Okay.
For those of you that are land trusts, you need to be careful about paying more than fair market value as a nonprofit. And I'm happy to talk offline with any land trust that has a question about that anytime. But as a nonprofit, as a 501c3 charitable organization, you are limited as to how much you can pay for a property and with a very small margin above fair market value. That's an IRS thing.
Yeah. Another just thought about appraisals. If you are going to be acquiring the property and you're looking to get federal funding, just note that most federal funding sources, the feds, require that you appraise the easement value. For our purposes, for fee purchases, for the most part, the appraisal is appraising the fee simple interest in the property. But again, if you're getting, you anticipate utilizing federal funding, make sure that your appraiser values both the easement and the fee simple values for the property, because you'll need both. Make sure that your appraisers identify all of the sources. DEEP has to be named as an intended user, as does any of the federal funding sources. They have to be named in the report as a user of the report. So this section, who's the property owner? A lot of this is general. The title search, sometimes people say, do I need a title search? Do I need a title certificate, title policy? We value or score the application accordingly. The title search and certificate and policy are all great. If you can attach copies of the liens or encumbrances, that's also very helpful. When I look at the applications, basically I'm making sure that there's nothing problematic, no pre-existing conservation easements, no environmental contamination, nothing filed like that on the land records. That's kind of a section where I'm just looking for red flags. And if I find them, I usually pick up the phone and call you. Again, with letter of intent, purchase and sale agreement. Purchase and sale agreement scores a little higher than a letter of intent, only because the party is contracted and more likely to go through. Sometimes we just find that, applications with letter of intent are more likely to fall apart than if they have a contract. So a few more points there. Environmental impacts, I think we touched on that. If anything needs to be done to the property to make it suitable for passive recreational uses, that's a good place to say, hey, maybe we'll have, a little handicap trail we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. It's just another section which helps us to identify the efforts that you're going to put into it to make it, suitable for public use. Supporting material, all of the above that we just discussed. And so getting again to agricultural uses, if there's going to be limited public access, commissioner does have to approve it in writing. Basically, after the grant's awarded, before we fund the property, I actually have to get the commissioner to sign a letter approving, the limited public access in order for the, grant to be approved and forwarded to the Attorney General. That letter has to accompany the grant for funding. So that's kind of where we go with that. If for any reason you anticipate that, there can't be public access in the application, please make me aware of it and why. Again, if it's, for endangered species or anything like that, this is a good place to let us know. Forest management, agricultural, the forest management, if there's a definition somewhere in here, maybe it's in the FAQs. If it's a core forest, please look at the definition. A lot of applications last time identified themselves as core forest, so that this time around we put the definition in there just to help people identify it. Agricultural soils, there's NRCS is a good resource. They can help you identify the soils on the property, and they can even help you with your mapping. And so they're a good resource for that. If there's any barns or sheds on the property, they either have to be excluded out prior to our awarding the grant. So like ideally, if the sheds or the barns are like close to the roadway, it's a simple matter of surveying it out. You could just have the surveyor go around it. Unfortunately, sometimes these things are right in the middle, smack dab. If it's something you really want to keep, it's a little more difficult to survey out something right in the middle, because now you have to survey the whole length of the access drive, or just the middle of the property. But if it's not something you want to keep, it has to be demolished. And I usually give people a warning here that you have to purchase the property in fee, obviously, before you can tear down a building. You have to own it to own the property. So you would have to close on the property up front. We could do the grant as a reimbursement because that building would have to come down prior to our release of grant funding. So you have, hopefully, if there's a building that needs to be demolished, you have all your funds up front, and then we would wait for the building to be demolished, and then we would reimburse you after you own the property. So we wouldn't be able to give you the grant funds up front to close if that's the case. Do we want to pause before we get to public access?
Yeah, Jamie, I think there's several
Any
good
questions?
questions to go ahead and pose right now.
Right, let me see where we left off. So, question from Jennifer: what does the seller need to know regarding funding timelines?
Well, when you submit the grant on September 30th, if the seller is chomping at the bit and wants to close immediately, you can close on October 1. They can always close immediately after the application deadline. However, it is a little bit at your own risk. If there's something comes up on the survey, if something comes up in the title work, we always try to work through those issues. If there's an encroachment on the property, then we have to have a neighbor do an affidavit and quit claim any rights they have to that portion of the property, or again, survey it out. A lot of things come up during the process of surveying and doing title work, which could delay, the approval. Or what if then something comes up that we can't resolve? You've now purchased the property and we can't do a grant. However, like I said, I think I've really, I can't recall a time when, except for the conservation easement issue, if there's an encroachment, little things, title issues, most of them can be resolved. Boundary line disputes, we say get a boundary line agreement. A lot of things that can come up, but the best thing to do is always to go through the process, tell the seller that, we anticipate after the application deadline and after the award, it will likely take another year or so to close. So 6 months to a year, the smaller properties maybe that aren't but huge, the surveys are usually the most time consuming thing. If it's a small property and you can get it surveyed in 2-3 months, likely we can close sooner. Title issues are much simpler and quicker. A big property, it's more time consuming. My surveyor and I are now doing a 700-acre survey, and it's taking quite a while. There's a lot of issues, and a lot of encroachments can pop up. So things like that will delay, but not stop the process. But usually the bigger the property, the longer it takes. So use your judgment on, and if you've got a title report, if it's clean, if its property's been surveyed, nothing's ever come up before, you should be able to close pretty quick. There's,
And Allison,
it's all.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, is the time frame or expected time frames also clarified in the FAQs? Can folks refer to that as well for additional information?
Well, we have suggested time completion, time frames. That's basically as a guidance to you. We want to see if you don't provide the purchase and sale agreement with your application, you need that within like 3 months. Again, we're just trying to make sure that this deal is going forward. If you don't have a purchase and sale agreement within 3 months of your award, most likely there's a problem. You should be able to get to that step. Within 9 months, of receiving the grant award, we would like to see your survey. But this is just basically helping us to move you through the process in a timely fashion. It won't always be that. There's no hard and fast. Again, things come up. If it takes you a year, but I know, like somebody calls me and says, I'm really working on this, we came upon a hitch, that's fine. Just keep me posted. Let me know you're working on it. As long as we know you're working on it, you're moving and you're doing everything you can, those are just guidelines. They're not hard and fast.
Communication is important. And then moving on, Deb had asked if there are deep monies available to help clean up a site. So this is back to the contamination. They have one site in mind that has a bulk waste dump. So I am not aware of any deep monies. Are you, Allison? And if anything, we might just want to find a web link to the remediation division for folks to follow up with after.
Yeah, I'm not very knowledgeable on contamination. That's always been kind of a pre-qualifier of this program. So I've only come upon it in my 15 years, 2 or 3 times, and I've done 165 closings. So it doesn't come up often, but I always defer to my colleagues if it comes up.
Okay.
And I'm not aware of any funding.
So moving on, Chris has a question. If a land trust has a plan to preserve a property partly by easement and partly by fee purchase, is this allowable under a single grant?
Sure, but you're only going to have the appraisal, like say the land trust wants to purchase the whole thing in fee, but our easement is only going to be, say it's 100 acres in fee. Our easement's only going to be on 75 acres. That's what you're going to have appraised. When you say you're still purchasing it in fee, so you would still have it appraised in fee, but you're only going to appraise the 75 acres as opposed to the 100. That being said, again, there's other things with the appraisal that the appraisers need to do. That's called a before and after appraisal. It's a partial appraisal, has to be done differently than your regular appraisal. So make sure that your appraiser knows how to do the right kind of appraisal for partial interest.
Okay, and Catherine has a question. I want to confirm a statement they heard about buildings correctly. Can a land trust take title to a property with buildings and subsequently be awarded OSWA funds?
Again, that goes to, it has to be raised or surveyed out. If you want to keep it, you can survey it out, but you'd have to purchase the property, and then we would only be able to give you the funding after you own it. Actually, I'm sorry. You can purchase the property with the building if you're going to exclude it, if you're going to survey it out. But if it has to be demolished, you have to purchase it first and have all the funds in place to do so.
And I just want to add clarification to that because I have dealt with that situation before. And that is, as you say, it's excluded. So it's surveyed out, not necessarily on the map with pins and you know, those boundaries located, but it's more for the purpose. I'm more asking this question for you, Allison, for clarification. It's more for the purpose of the valuation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So it's surveyed out and then the appraiser excludes that portion with the buildings on it when valuating the fair market value of the property, correct?
Usually it's, well, we hope it's only going to be a small portion. You know, if it's a 50-foot barn by 25-foot, the appraiser's not going to, you know, take that a deduction in value for that teeny little small area. No, that wouldn't be a concern. It's just a matter that we can't do a conservation easement on a property with a building. But it's more of a surveying out or demolishing issue. We don't make them evaluate differently because usually it's such a small little piece, you know, it's not of consequence really, valuation wise.
So hopefully that answers Catherine's question. Like, so Allison, you said that we can't do a conservation easement on a property with buildings. So like, long story short, applicants shouldn't be submitting projects with substantial structures on them, right?
No. They can do it. They just have to be aware that they're going to have to survey that area out or raise it. Our easement has to go around it. So if you got 100 acres, you got a barn on the street somewhere right along the frontage. Ultimately, once the survey's done, the surveyor is just going to go around it. That's all. And it's just a small part that's not part of our conservation easement. The land trust is still going to purchase the whole piece with the buildings. Our easement is just not on it.
Moving to a question about encroachments, Wendy asks, so if the property is surveyed and there are multiple encroachments, do they have to be resolved before the grant is approved or before closure?
Yes, they have to all be resolved. And this is what a lot of times slows us down on the surveying. I've got, you know, a property now that had like 15 encroachments. The town had to go back and, you know, do something on, you know, almost like a lawsuit to get somebody to move a shed because the shed was encroaching on the property. We have to get affidavits of title, affidavits from every single one of those abutters. It's a pain, and it all has to be done before we even get to title. I have to get that resolved in the survey part of my process. So if it comes up, I mean, I've yet to have a deal not go through for about an encroachment. We'll just cross that bridge when we get to it, and it's not a big deal unless it's time consuming. That's all. It slows things down.
Chris again asks, if a land trust is seeking to preserve two or more contiguous properties or parcels, can that be allowed under one single grant?
Sure. I mean, if they're, yeah, absolutely, we can do two.
And this is the last one, and we can go back to the application. Similar to discussion on the structures, can you exclude a small section of the property that has environmental issues?
Yeah, you could. That might even be, you know, something that we recommended if we did find out that there was issues. Might even say that you'd have to survey that out. The only warning there is, I don't know how big it is. One thing that also comes up is when you're putting a size of the property down, say it's 100 acres on your application. At the end of the day, once it's surveyed, it can't be less than 90 acres. We typically just use a ballpark of 10%. If it's less than 90 acres, we could say, you know, we can't do this, come back and reapply. Or we could say, you have to get it reappraised. And we could, you know, we could ask you to do a couple different things. But I always say to people, when you're writing your application up, if you don't have a survey, and especially if it's a really big property, estimate on the side of caution. Estimate smaller than you think it is. Because if you think, you know, if you say 100 acres and it turns out when you get it surveyed it's 80, that could be a problem. So, you know, estimate a little on the low side just to be careful. If you have to, you know, take away an area for, you know, contamination, it can't be more than 10% of the total area, or it could forfeit the grant.
Thank you. And I'll do one last question that's related to the contiguous properties. Amy just sent us a time check. So just to move this along, Allison, do the contiguous properties need to be owned by the same person, or can they be different property owners? It sounds, to me, it sounds like it would be easier just to have one name, right? But what do you think?
No, they can be different.
Okay.
Obviously, they would have to be appraised separately because they're under separate ownership. So the appraiser would have to value both of the properties separately.
Thank you. All right, well, with the time check, let's go back to the application. Thank you, everyone, for your questions so far. They're very good.
Again, with recreational resources, if any of you have done this before, kudos. This is where, you know, most of y'all excel. You know, some of you with all these environmental backgrounds, this is where you can really put your best foot forward, describing the property, what makes it unique, what features it has, getting to support public outreach. So again, this is a little bit new. This has been added in recent years. Now with all the, you know, everything being online and everyone having websites, you know, what kind of public outreach? Will you have that on your webpage? Will you have the trail? All this is good to know. Some land trusts really do a great job. You know, they have all their trail maps out there. They're on, you know, different websites, that trail apps and all that. Write that up, you know, that helps to know too. That's something a little bit new. Accessibility for people with disabilities. We know that, you know, in many cases due to slopes and terrain and, you know, water and whatnot, you can't always have public access, but a lot of people actually put their best foot forward, and maybe to have, you know, from the parking lot, you know, a nice stone dust trail that's handicap wheelchair accessible, you know, that goes out to, you know, maybe a viewing platform overlooking a lake or anything like that. You will get points for anything that you can do to facilitate handicap access. Again, in that section, they talk about greenway. If it's on a Blue Blaze trail, designated greenway, all of that, just make sure you point that out if it's close or adjacent to. Will it connect to a trail or greenway? Very important. Past grant compliance, this section was added in the past couple of years, and I know it's a lot of work, and we appreciate the work you put into it. Pictures of your parking area, your trails, and your signage. We asked for a couple pictures of your sign, one close up, mainly because a lot of times, you know, in the beginning when we first started this, I would get a picture of a sign and it would be, you know, way off in the distance in a tree. I can't even read it. So that's why we asked for one close up so we can read it, and maybe another just so that we can see where it is. You know, is it visible from the roadway? Is it visible from the parking lot? Something like that. Again, something new in the past couple of years, the EJ and equity component. We actually have quite a lot of points now on our score sheet. We found that, you know, unfortunately, always in years past, targeted and investment communities, obviously those bigger cities, they never tended to score well, and they were always at the bottom and got funded at the lowest percentage if we had a sliding scale. This year, our first year kind of scoring under a different lens or focus, EJ and equity applicants actually rose to the top. They scored very well, given this new, you know, lens that we're looking at. So we're happy to see some of our inner cities, which often fell to the bottom, rise up. So I think we were good in doing that. Are you close to an urban center? What's your population? If you're on a bus line, anything that would help bring the public onto your property in this section. Let's see. There's supporting documents here, excerpts. I'm just noting, just as a reminder, if you're putting excerpts in your application, any council, government, regional, you know, authority, any plans, please just use an excerpt. Don't attach the whole plan. We'll save space when you send it to me electronically, and we only want excerpts, not copies of whole plan. External support, just as a word of advice, if you're looking for all of these support materials, if you're starting your application, do that now. Don't wait till the last minute. These people a lot of times take you know, a month or two to, you know, sometimes they have to go to a board and get approval to do a support letter. So get those letters out, those requests out for support letters right away. I would say support letters and appraisals are the first thing you want to do with your application. With the support letters, again, only one letter. You know, we don't need 5 letters from the Inland Wetlands Commission, or, you know, just one. You're going to get the points with just one letter. That's all you need. Regional support, again, those are the ones that take time. Try to get those out now. Alignment with all of these plans of conservation and development, GC3. You got your work cut out for you here. You're going to have to do a lot of reading and going through these plans and just finding what's relevant to your property. But you should be able to find, most of these plans have some conservation values for, you know, you have water properties, you have, you know, ridge lines, steep slopes. There's something in there for everyone. So you should be able to find a section in most of these plans that might be applicable to your property, but you're going to have to do some reading. Yeah, it's in alignment with the, the state's green plan, GC3 recommendations, all of these plans. Just go through them, go through these plans one by one, pull out excerpts, and then you're going to just attach those as part of this section of the application. This is where we get into the task completion timelines. This is more of just sort of an advance notice. It's not really anything you have to do, just be aware of, but at the bottom, we will ask for the resolution, your budget line items that you have funds in. And obviously, some land trusts don't always have funds. They're raising funds and busy. If you don't have funds in place, give an explanation. How do you plan on raising funds? And are you going to be, reaching out to different funding sources? Always ask your funding sources. Are you going to, require anything in exchange? Like if you're giving us money, are you going to require a conservation easement? That should be something that you ask them. Make sure that you put that in your grant application, because we'll need to discuss that. Who's going to maintain and be the steward of the property? A lot of land trusts, again, this is their expertise. Municipalities typically have, they're more apt to have like a fund in place, Parks and Rec, people that will manage the property. Just tell us, who's going to take care of it and where the money is coming from. If you have, a stewardship fund that extends out, that, more points on your application. Do we want to do, are there any questions before we get into?
Well, for the sake of time, we can probably do maybe 10 more minutes on the topic of OSWA, and then if we want to switch gears to the urban green grants. I know that we aren't able to cover everything. It's an extensive application process, but folks can always contact us afterwards.
And, feel free to contact me anytime. I always, I love to hear from everybody. If you have any questions, call me. I actually, I'm one of those people who prefers to talk on the phone. And a lot of times, some of these questions, one question turns into another question, and it's sequential. It's back and forth. So it's easier for me to talk on the phone. If you're calling to ask me a question, we can get right to the matter. A lot of times with just a little back and forth.
Yeah, I'd say we just do a going once, going twice for some final questions on the OSWA grant program. And again, recognizing that this is just the beginning. And as you move through, as Allison and Jamie just indicated, they are open for your questions, as are we at CLCC anytime.
Does anyone want to raise their hand, and you can turn on your mic?
Looks like
Chris.
There you go.
Hey, thanks, Jamie and Allison. I had put a question in the chat box about the distressed and targeted municipalities list, and I wondered if DEP had also considered using the census block data that the Environmental Justice Group put together in GIS. It would expand the areas that the program could be applied to, and it would address some of the same types of areas that you want to do program work in. So I don't know if that could be an additional consideration for geographic location.
I think that's a great idea. Maybe that, unfortunately, we haven't got it in this application, but we should certainly discuss putting that in the EJ and equity section of the application as another, way to score in that section.
Yeah,
so great idea, Chris.
And I'll add to that, Chris, it is a great idea. And the State Review Board has been discussing amendments to the OSWA statute moving forward, where targeted and distressed communities are specifically, referenced in that statute, and expanding it just as the way you suggested. And then also looking at ways to incorporate that in the application. So it is definitely something on the radar screen for sure. And as Allison said, it's not there yet. And of course, with the statutory amendment, it has to be done through the legislative session, but it's definitely on the radar screen. So thank you.
I know that when we scored the last grant round, my EJ folks that were on the scoring group, I want to say that they did look at that. And I think internally they did bring that to the table. We discussed it. I just don't think it made it to the application, but they did take that into consideration when they were scoring.
I think, Jamie, there's one more question about the definition of ADA compliance, and I will look. Well, Allison, I don't know if you have the answer to that right off the top of your head.
No, I don't have the definition right offhand, sorry.
I don't either, Amy. So if you could find that for folks, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can't get to it right now, absolutely contact me, and we'll point that out to you in the materials. So going once, going twice, any other questions on OSWA? And then we can, otherwise we'll move on to the Urban Green and Community Garden Program. Just to remind you that the documents, in addition to the application on the DEEP web page for the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program, besides the application, that packet includes not only the frequently asked questions that we have been alluding to, but also the scoring sheet, which is also very helpful in crafting your answers to the application. So I encourage you to look at all of that as you start your application and before you get too far into it. And then certainly Allison and Jamie are available for questions around those documents as well. So thanks for coming for the OSWA component of this. You can hang around and again, or come back in using the same Zoom link if you have questions about CLCC's new transaction assistance grant program, which is exclusively for land trusts. And it's not just limited to transactions under OSWA, it's for any land conservation project that you are working on or will be working on in the next year or so. So hang around or come back in, and at around 2 o'clock, we'll be taking questions on that if you have any. So thanks for coming, and we'll move on to Urban Green Community Garden. Jamie, are you gonna walk us through that application, or Allison, or you, or how do you wanna do that?
Well, if you'll assist again with screen sharing, and to be perfectly honest, folks, I've only been in this role for less than 2 weeks, so I only know the super basics at this point, and I'll probably defer a lot to Allison in answering any questions, as well as, I'll at this point, all I can do is read the application verbatim along with you. I don't have any additional insights or secrets for you, but just I'm here to offer that I am now here to help, and I'm going to learn along with you and hopefully assist you as best as I can. And so if you would like to share screen, so it looks much like the OSWA first page, cover page. Who's going to be involved. So normally these grants, which are administered underneath OSWA, they're entered into with municipalities, and sometimes co-sponsored with nonprofits. There is a 50% matching fund requirement. So whatever your total project cost is, the sponsor, the municipality, is required to match 50% of that. So here, submitting your application, we appreciate and we prefer electronic, and you're welcome to send it to Allison, but you also have me now, and I can include my information at the end of this, put it into the chat, my email. Eligibility criteria. So again, the distressed municipalities are set in statute, and I think it's every year they come out with a new list. So is that correct? Or is it every other year that, is it OPM that comes out with the list?
Yeah, it's OPM. Last year, I think I had a 2020 distressed or 2019 target. It depends on when we come out with our application. And if they have come out with a new list, they're two separate lists. So last year, I think I had 2 different years, but this year I just used the 2021 list for both.
So Allison, if you could explain further, I see some information in here about nonprofit organizations. Would you like to just explain the relationship between the municipalities and the nonprofits and how this normally goes when they work together to submit an application to us?
Sure. Well, first of all, the property has to be owned by the municipality that's applying. So the renovations or the restorations will take part on municipality property. They're, the primary contractor. The land trust, if partnering with the municipality, usually does most of the work. They're the ones out there, getting all the worker bees and buying all the materials and doing all the work. So they would submit invoices to the municipality once the grant is signed, and then we pay the municipality, and then the municipality reimburses the nonprofit. So they're somewhat of a go-between, and because we're only allowed to contract and give money to the municipality, but they're working closely. Hopefully the municipality and the land trust, actually, we require that they have some sort of an agreement between themselves, who's going to do what, and that they're going to work together. Typically, the municipalities, when they apply for the grant, they're going to ask, go for a resolution, asking that they can apply for a UGCG grant, they can partner with this organization, and sometimes even the resolution will outline their responsibilities. So, that kind of legwork is put forth in the application. But all the money goes to the municipality. Typically, the land trust does most of the work.
Thank you. And so these funds are granted towards projects that create, enhance, or restore community gardens or urban green spaces that support the care and management of tree populations in urban settings. We also like raised bed gardens. We always talk about public access and must show how that public will access these areas and enjoy the benefits of the project. And much like with OSWA, because remember this program is nestled underneath OSWA, the project cannot be for commercial activities and or intensive recreational uses, so ball fields and structures. And of course, the municipality must have an updated or recent and active plan of conservation development. So, tell us about your project and how it fits within the criteria, eligibility criteria and standards, and how is it going to serve the community? And much like Allison was talking about, explain how the site's going to be managed and by whom. What are their roles in it? And any documentation for supporting materials include maps showing us where are we. What's your design for the raised bed gardens or the pollinator garden or urban tree layout, and how do the public access it, enjoy it? And of course, what's your budget? What is the total project cost? And this should be detailed. So one line isn't going to help us at our office understand how the monies are going to be used and if they are eligible under this grant program. So here we have clarification that, again, it's the grant is 50% of the total project cost. And as Allison mentioned, the site has to be held, it has to be owned by the city and free from any liens or encumbrances or easements that prevent the site for being used for the intended purposes of this grant program, the community garden, the public community garden or passive recreation area. So you'll support your application with a copy of the deed to the parcel or to the site, any land use agreement. And of course there's ADA requirements. So depending, like, I think I've seen folks submit applications in the past with raised bed gardens that are actually built to a height to accommodate people in wheelchairs, for example. Again, narrative to include justification for a community need. How is this going to help your community? How are these funds going to benefit the urban population center here? We'd like to see an excerpt from the Municipal Plan of Conservation and Development that points to or supports your project, is consistent with the city's overall goal and plan for increasing public access, and in particular community gardens and the benefits therefrom. And local support, this is important. So you need your letters of support from the municipality or from different commissions and boards at the city or town that say they are in favor of this project and that they're aware of this project and they're aware of the design and any implications that it could have. You know, if a parcel's already committed, so to speak, for a different use, well, I don't think our office wants to be in the middle of that scuffle. So let's see what else. Again, stewardship, operation, and maintenance capabilities. We need to know long-term, both short-term and long-term, how are these funds going to be used, and you know, will it be a benefit in the long term? And we always talk about compliance. So if you're up to date, if your city and your partner nonprofit are up to date or compliant with any past or outstanding grants, contracts that you have with us, then you're going to get more points, be considered more over somebody or a project or a city that has issues that we have not fully buttoned up or resolved in the past. And here again, we talk again about photographs and signage. So we need to acknowledge that the state, DEP have provided funding towards this project. We need to be, you know, supported in that way, and let folks know that this is public open space or a public community garden in this case.
I think that's the end of the application. There's an
Allison, I was going to say,
sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
Was there anything else in that that we can clarify further? I went very fast and didn't really expand on anything.
I believe there's an FAQ. That's what I started to say. There's also a frequently asked question
Yeah,
document to help parse out some of the application criteria. Yep.
yep.
And one question that was posed so far about this, it does have to do with the public access requirement, which I did also put a comment in there because at CLCC and through the Open Space Review Board, the issue has come up, particularly in the context of community gardens. But actually, the question that was raised by Michelle was, how about commercial activities that are intended not to make a profit, but to support maintenance of the land? So I defer to you, of course, but I don't think that's the concern, is to having activities that are commercial activities to support the land as much as using it to generate a profit. Is that correct?
What would be an example of that?
Well, Michelle, if you're here, you can certainly speak for yourself. I've got some ideas of maybe what you're talking about.
Okay, so I was thinking of a project where native plants would be sold to the community at a discount rate, but also to maybe support the maintenance of the land and the maintenance of the operations, and to have to support a garden that the residents of the town could use.
I think that in the past, when this has come up, when a small fee is being charged, as long as you can show that you're not making money here, and you would maybe show a budget or something, how we are planning on spending this money. You need to be able to show that this is money that is not profit, it's just being put back into the land, and what you're going to use that money for.
Okay, thank you.
We have to kind of look at it case by case, but what you just said sounds like something that, could be justified. Just tell us what you're going to do with the money. Sorry, with that tickle. Yes, just explain it case by case,
And similar to that issue, Allison, that has come up has been with regard to public access, particularly with the community gardens, where there's been some concern and a desire to just fence off when the area is fenced, to gate it and lock it at night, and they have hours of operation. So I want to make sure that folks understand what public access means in the context of this grant program as opposed to OSWA.
Yeah, we treat these a little bit differently. Obviously, we're inner city. People are worried about safety. That's kind of like why people want sheds, because, it's not safe and they have to put their tools away at night. Things that we wouldn't allow, in open space, sheds, buildings, open air pavilions, things like that can be used outdoors. But yeah, obviously fences are allowed in this program for gardens and can be locked up at night. The signage can just indicate dawn to dusk, or whatever the hours are.
So if there are no further questions, going once, going twice, please, feel free to raise your hand or even unmute yourself and jump in. We're only about 24 people here now. So, and that includes us. So I think there's plenty of room for informality if you'd like to just unmute and ask your question. So a huge thanks to Jamie and Allison, and I think Andrew might have had to leave for another meeting, but thanks to him as well for joining us today and spending so much time in explaining the applications and some of the nuances of the programs. And I highly encourage all of you to apply and take advantage of the funding that we were successful in advocating for this past legislative session. These are great programs, and as always, CLCC is always happy to assist you. We do, as you know, many of you know, that we have a new Connecticut Conservation Partnership Program, which in partnership with DEEP, we will be accepting applications for federal grant money that can be used to match your OSWA grant. So that if that is something of interest to you, I encourage you to check out our website at ctconservation.org. And I think I also put that in the chat, but just contact us directly, and in particular, Yao, who is administering that program for CLCC, and we will guide you right through that as well. So with that, Allison and Jamie, you're welcome to hang around to hear about the Transaction Assistance Grant Program. Otherwise, thank you both so much for all your time today.
Thank you too.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.